is change management and why is it so important for organizations?
Yep, that's a great question. So change management, the easiest way to think about it, it's a framework, it's a process for helping leaders in the workplace, in organizations, think about how to approach implementing a change at work. And it can apply beyond the workplace. It can be in communities, it can be personal as well, but change management is typically aligned with organizational change. And it's multifaceted in many ways. It takes a look at human behavior. So what do people in the workplace need to think? What do they need to feel?
Right.
How do they need to behave in order for that change, that future state to be successful? So there's a combination of theory and concepts that leaders can leverage to approach the change. They can blend in stakeholder engagement and communications and training and creating internal influencer networks to help move that change along. So change management really provides a template for people to follow so they can successfully implement whatever it is they want to change. It could be an org restructure, M&A, it could be a system implementation. And that's really the best way to think about it.
Welcome to the Turbo Branding Show, where we help you ignite your growth by leveraging your brand to grow faster, easier, and more successfully. I'm your host, Sue Kirshner, and today I'm welcoming Jessica Crow to the show. So let's delve into today's episode and turbocharge your brand. So first, thank you so much for being here, Jessica.
Thank you so much, Sue, for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, me too. I am excited to have you on to talk about the parallels between the principles of branding and change management, because there's so many things that intersect and they both, rely on an emotional connection and a leader or an advocate to get things through. So we will jump into that in a second. But first, let me share your background with everyone and why you are the expert to talk about change management. So Jessica Crow is an experienced business leader, consultant, coach with deep expertise in change management, leadership development, and organizational effectiveness. She is passionate about helping organizations bridge the gaps between strategy and execution and value creation through targeted strategies that empower people, in turn, power positive change. So in 2019, Jessica founded Apogy, a change management training, coaching, and consulting services firm. And in addition to that firm, Jessica hosts the Change Leader Insights podcast. She teaches yoga as a certified yoga instructor, and she serves as an adjunct professor at the University of Denver. So very cool, very impressive.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, all things related to people and change. I'm here for it.
Absolutely. Love it. So now that, even though I read your bio here, let me ask you a couple more questions so that we can get to know you and your personal brand a little bit better. But, let's kind of start with what is change management and why is it so important for organizations?
Yep, that's a great question. So change management, the easiest way to think about it, it's a framework, it's a process for helping leaders in the workplace, in organizations, think about how to approach implementing a change at work. And it can apply beyond the workplace. It can be in communities, it can be personal as well, but change management is typically aligned with organizational change. And it's multifaceted in many ways. It takes a look at human behavior. So what do people in the workplace need to think? What do they need to feel, right? You mentioned that emotional connection earlier.
Right.
How do they need to behave in order for that change, that future state to be successful? So there's a combination of theory and concepts that leaders can leverage to approach the change. They can blend in stakeholder engagement and communications and training and creating internal influencer networks to help move that change along. So change management really provides a template for people to follow so they can successfully implement whatever it is they want to change. It could be an org restructure, M&A, it could be a system implementation. And that's really the best way to think about it. I will say there are many different frameworks, many providers of change management training and methodologies, and a lot of evidence-based research that shows that certain models have and kind of why change management makes sense. So you've got a lot of options when you're out there in terms of looking for a template to help lead yourself and others through change.
All right. I love it. I love it because as you mentioned, branding and change management, they both involve communicating a message, right?
Yes.
And they're all about fostering buy-in for a new direction.
Yes.
Or even a consistent direction. So I love that. But so now going back to you, Why change management for you? What attracted you to specialize in this area, or what's your superpower that you were like, this is
Right.
where I could apply it?
Funny enough, I think like many people who ended up in change management, we sort of found our way there. It wasn't that I was actively seeking change management out. In fact, when I got hired, I was at a healthcare organization and they said, your role is communications and change management. And I was like, well, what is change management? They're like, okay, we'll go through this training and you'll find out. And so it ended up being something that I became responsible for. But what I loved about it so much was that it created this, the guardrails for how to think about strategically implementing change. And the focus was always on people, on the people side, our emotions, the funny things that make us tick and how we move people through. So I was, like I said, at a healthcare organization leading change and communications for some pretty big software implementations. And that evolved over time to just cover a lot of different areas of the business. I had lots of different roles in the organization, from strategy and operations to innovation to clinical program oversight. And in every single role, I was using my change management skills. And so that led me to, when I decided to move on from that healthcare organization, start my own change management training, coaching, and consulting firm, because I saw and experienced the value of applying an approach like change management to the work that I was doing. And I wanted others to be able to do that. And I also thought, wow, how might organizational cultures and projects change if everybody had the right understanding of what it takes to really be successful when you're implementing change at scale. So that's how I sort of ended up in the change management space and just continued to follow that thread because of the, how people are center to all of this. Yeah, so that's kind of the what led me to change management, at least.
Okay, excellent, excellent. So, yeah, let's dig a little bit further into change management and then the parallels with brand building. Because one of the
Yes.
things you were talking to me about when we talked before this interview was, you know, you need a champion, right? Every change management initiative needs a champion, and every brand strategy initiative needs a champion as
Yeah.
well. In the case of companies and brand strategy, it's usually the CEO or the founder who acts as the brand champion, right? They have to identify it, communicate it, model it for employees
Yep.
and customers, and make strategic decisions that strengthen that brand. So that obviously the strongest brands are the ones where everyone is buying into it and working in that same direction. But
Absolutely.
how do we bring that change management concept into brand building or vice versa? Because I would think with change management, sometimes you need someone to brand it internally, right?
You're correct. Yeah. Yeah. And there are so many synergies and alignment between brand strategy and change management. And in fact, even when I was saying communications, I was thinking more holistically as marketing communications and branding, because what you're describing, is completely true. So when it comes to change management, and, we can interchange this word with brand strategy,
Yep.
there does need to be someone who is marching and leading the charge forward. And the example you gave was the CEO or someone in the C-suite. That is also true when it comes to implementing change in an organization. There needs to be someone in a position of, I'll say authority, but someone who is recognized as a leader, who is respected. And when the CEO is behind the change, that certainly helps, because people, they want to do what is right for the organization. At the end of the day, there are things that ultimately get in the way. But when they see the people at the top, I'll say, pushing something forward, believing in something, casting that vision, that's where that buy-in starts to take shape. That's where that inspiration to align with that change starts to take shape. So when you mention brand, yeah, there should be someone inside talking about, what is the brand of this change? How do we want people to feel? What do we want them to think? And that can even go as far as creating campaigns around the change, really doing some intentional branding. I've been a part of projects where we created our own logo and charter and set of values. And that was how the leaders of that project modeled the way forward. They explained, here's the vision, here's the behaviors that align with this vision, here's how we're thinking about this. And then they walked the talk. And that's what helped people see that way forward. So change management, it's called sponsorship, executive sponsorship, when you're at that level where you are leading the change. And so similar to brand strategy, you've got the CEO who's guiding that forward. There's a lot of, connection there.
Right.
And with champions, do you want me to talk about champions a little bit?
Absolutely. Let's talk about champions.
Yeah.
Yes.
So champions, in change management, they're called change champions or change agents. Maybe in the marketing context, you might think of them as influencers, internal influencers, not the kind on social media per se, but they have the same sort of cachet, right?
Mhm.
People resonate with your internal influencers or change champions because they see something in them that they either see in themselves that resonates, or they aspire or admire the way that person behaves, the things that person does. And when that individual, that champion is like, hey, I'm on board with this. I can do this. I can show you how. Then all of the people who are wondering, is this something that I can do? Do I want to do it? But someone they admire, respect, and trust is doing that, then that's how it encourages them to make that mindset shift that is so critical when it comes to implementing change. So your champions are really individuals who people see as someone that they trust and respect, and they want to align with that individual. And that change champion can really be a steward, really help advance whatever the change is, taking on special projects, just being more active and visible, which is really at the heart of being an effective sponsor. Whether you're the CEO or you're a change champion, you have to be willing to be out there to talk about the change, to talk about the brand and walk that talk. That's the starting point.
So important. Right. Exactly. So how do you, so let's say you're the CEO or founder of an organization, and you want to implement some change.
Mhm.
How do you identify these influencers, right? I mean, are these people who are raising their hand, or
Yeah.
is it just that look at someone and say, gosh, this person seems to be a great leader of this team or this division. Let's ask them to be an influencer. How do you help coach your clients to say who would be the champion internally?
Yeah. Well, truthfully, it starts with doing a listening tour and having conversations. So, to answer your question directly, someone who volunteers or has a track record of high performance and a strong team, they would make good change champions, potentially.
Right.
But what you will find is that if you start to ask questions, I would recommend the CEO or whomever is leading this change to start talking, to bring in a circle of people that they trust. If it's confidential, then they'll have to keep it, they'll have to approach it in the appropriate way, but just start asking questions like, who's an expert here? Who's the most critical of making changes? And start there, because what you might find is that people who aren't necessarily at a certain level in the organization, they might have an expertise or some passion around what it is that's going to be changing. And they might have recognition with their peer group that is really powerful. So usually when a change is implemented, there are people on the front line. In healthcare, we talk about the front line. In
Right.
other organizations, it could be your, other types of employees.
Right.
Those are typically the individuals who are impacted most by a change, right? You're implementing a system you want them to use, you want to change the culture. So finding people within their peer group is really important. So that's why that listening tour, having those conversations, another reason that's important is because people, they don't necessarily not like change. They just don't like surprises, right? Like they want to
Right.
also be brought in and to help co-collaborate. So when you have other people identifying or self-identifying through that process, that ends up creating a sense of ownership that you wouldn't have had if you said, here's the change we're implementing, tell me who wants to lead this, or you've got a track record of success, why don't you do that? Now it could be the same person,
Sure.
right? But you might find some other individuals in the organization who could actually be even more effective because of who they are and what they're interested in and how their peers know them.
Right. No, I like what you said there about listening and going on a
Mhm.
listening tour. What I do for my clients when I'm helping them identify what their brand is, we obviously go out and we talk to their most important stakeholders,
Makes sense. Yeah.
which a lot of times that's your customers, but it's also your employees. Because as we were
Yeah.
talking about influencers, every employee is a brand ambassador, right? And
Absolutely.
some employees actually are touch points for customers and things like that, where they do
Yeah,
interact, and they may be the brand for that customer. They may be
that's
the only
true.
person that customer talks to. So that's where it really is important to kind of, like you were talking about, communicate the brand, have these brand ambassadors internally so that you can emulate and say, oh, I see what it means to deliver on this brand promise. That's how so and so does it, or things like that.
Absolutely.
But it's
Yeah.
also, when I do my interviews with customers and internally with employees, that's where I can help provide that third party objective.
Hmm.
These people might be your best influencers internally to walk the talk, model the brand promise for other people within
Yeah.
the organization because they either articulated it amazingly well, what the brand stood for, or they were just so gung-ho and represented all of the core values and competencies that they're trying to get
Yeah.
across with the brand promise. So,
I
yeah.
would imagine through that process that that you take your clients through that you're also getting potentially some insights that about the brand and the individuals that are new and different that maybe the company wasn't thinking about and can really, pull in like, oh, hey, did you know this is a reason why this customer is so closely, like loyal to your company? I would imagine that comes out as well. It did through
Absolutely.
the listening tours that we did within the organizations that I worked in and supported.
Right, right. So let's go back to you. You touched on it a little bit, but I'd love to hear more about the idea of branding a change initiative
Hmm.
internally. And you talked about maybe having a logo or, some core values or things
Yeah.
like that. But what are some best practices around whether you actually legitimately brand or whether you're just communicating? What are some best practices to kind of grab the hearts and minds
Yeah.
of all the people who are going to be affected by this change?
Yeah. Well, and I think understanding the culture of the organization and the customers is important. I was in, the example that I was thinking of, I was in a healthcare organization and the branding that went to the extent of logos and fun characters and we have patients. I mean, that all worked together, but it may seem cheesy to, other companies. So be mindful of the culture and the environment and the
Right.
customers and what they want. But I will say the reason it's valuable is because every day in the workplace, there's 1,000 distractions, right? There's competing priorities, there's competing changes, there's internal and external factors that you're thinking of, you have to adapt to on the fly. When you brand and create a campaign around whatever that change is, you start to build brand recognition. I mean, I know you know this, right? It's almost
Right.
like advertising. When
Right.
you see a logo or you see colors or, internal, there's a same look and feel. There's the same people talking about the same things over and over. That starts to break through that disruption, that noise, and they're like, oh, I recognize that. Oh, maybe this time I'll actually listen to what they're talking about and saying. So there is value, whether it's to the extent of being, logos to just having a consistent look and feel and message, that does help because of the number of distractions. I'd say it's especially valuable when you have multi-year or really big transformation and changes because people want to anchor themselves to something that is bigger than themselves, right? They
Right.
want to feel like they're part of something. And so, when they make that shift or when they get on board or whatever it is, right, they understand the brand and the purpose and they see that branding that resonates with them. So it kind of pulls together what could feel like, why am I changing my behavior? Why am I listening to this person? It brings it all under one roof and it carries the narrative forward. And that can help provide the momentum, the motivation to keep changing or to keep trying when the going gets tough, when you're like, is this over yet? So it kind of like keeps and it helps to sustain the change after it has been implemented because people can kind of go back to the ways that they were working and behaving, and that's why branding is really valuable. You wouldn't want to do it for everything, right? Not for
Right.
small changes, not for quick changes, but think about the environment, think about the customers, think about the culture, and even the size and the duration of the change. And it can be a really powerful tool for creating that resonance and that buy-in that is really, really critical for people to more quickly accept, adopt, and sustain a change.
Yeah, no, I like that. It's interesting. I love what you said. People anchor themselves onto,
Yeah.
certain concepts or principles and ideas. And it reminds me, I did a previous episode with Jennifer Fangevay, who deals with M&A strategy.
Yeah.
And that was something she goes, I've been in three big giant multi-mergers And what people don't ever stop and realize, and when I say people, the executive team, is how the employees have anchored themselves to the
Yes.
brand, to the
Yeah.
company. And when someone comes in and acquires them, or there's going to be a brand change or things like that, it's disruptive. And
Very much. Yeah.
it cuts that tether that people have, or the anchor that people have to that brand, and it creates a lot of dissonance and some issues. But I know you and I talked a little bit about M&A, right? And
Yeah.
that's you couldn't come up with a bigger change scenario for
It is
certain
one of the
companies and things
hardest.
like
Yeah.
that. So maybe if you could share a story or two about if you were brought in to say, how do I help manage the change of this merger and acquisition, this
Mhm.
transaction that's going to disrupt a lot of different people and get them through it safely?
Yeah. It starts with educating the leadership team on what to expect because one of the hardest parts about M&A, because it's a confidential in many cases up until the point you announce it and
Right.
surprise the large majority, is that they have been thinking and planning and they understand the vision and they're totally bought in. And so they're ready to go day one. And
Yeah.
they don't understand that day one is day
Zero
zero
one.
for everyone else. And so it's helping that group of individuals recognize that. You mentioned that it's very disruptive and people are so anchored to the brand. There is a sense of loss and
Yes.
grief that happens, right? Because
Yes.
if you are the acquired company, even if you're the acquiring company, you're bringing in new people, new systems, new culture and values, and it feels very disruptive. And you go through that period of grief and loss. There's Kubler-Ross, her change curve talks about the stages of grief that we go through. It was aligned to people navigating, the end of their life, but it's very much applicable to change. And that's why it's been brought
Yeah.
up in change and potentially branding is that people have to go through that process before they can get to that point of acceptance. Okay, here
Yes.
we are, here's how we move forward. So it's educating the leadership team on what to expect and then being very intentional about what are we going to do to move forward together. So does that look like recreating or co-creating the values of the organization? Does it look like more listening tours, talking to people about what works, what doesn't? One of the most powerful tools, and this can be scary for leaders, is creating space for dialogue, letting people, in a contained, not letting it go on forever, right? Contained, supportive fashion, just talk about how they're feeling and what that means for them. And just by doing that, just by having those types of conversations, people will move through that process of grief and loss so much more quickly than if it's like, all right, we acquired the company, time to move on. You have to get on board or you can get out. Like that's just such a hard, abrupt, and that's not going to land as well as if you create space for those conversations and then you co-create what that future state looks like. You're going to have to repeat, you're going to have to brand over and over what the vision of the organization, the combined vision of the organization is.
Right.
And you're going to have those leaders who are going to be with the organization out there talking to people, reassuring them, but not that because they know they have all the answers, but because they're committed to what that vision looks like. M&A is very hard, especially with big organizations. There's going to be attrition and fallout and all of those things. And that's okay. It'll go a lot better if you have a good brand strategy, honestly,
Right.
of what does this look like? What does this vision look like? And how do we repeat this over and over and over again and bring people along and be willing to adapt and flex based on what we're hearing from our people too. So it's
Yes.
really about educating and then just starting those conversations and recognizing it's not going to, even if the deal closes, that's not it's day zero for everyone else, and how long that takes can depend on how much change management and branding
Yeah.
you apply before and after, and especially after. That can really have an impact on how people feel, how they
Yeah.
think, and then how quickly they're, and willing they are to move forward into that new promise of the future, whatever it looks like.
Right. No, exactly. Yeah. And it's something that, again, building on what you were just saying, that vision is everyone wants to know what their role is, right? It's like you've
Right.
talked about, okay, now
Self-concern.
you've
Yeah.
announced that we're this bigger and better entity, but if I'm an internal employee, what is my role now, right? Do I fit
Yeah.
in? What's changing? As you said, we're bringing in all these new people. Is that going to mess up the culture? Or am I no longer needed here? Things
Yes.
like that. But then another piece to that, if people do think about that during the merger and acquisition, is they figure, oh, well, nothing will be different for the customer. They'll just keep
Mm.
doing business as normal, but they don't stop to realize that those are people too, and they
Yeah.
have relationships with who they were working with, maybe the acquired company or acquiring company,
Yeah.
and they need communication and
Just as
and
much.
a
Yeah.
space to be heard just as much as internal employees do.
Yeah.
And talking
You
about
hit on the biggest thing that the understanding the impacts, the personal impacts, whether you're a customer or an employee,
Mhm.
that is the number one barrier that then creates resistance, which can lead to then loss of customer, employees can move on. So yeah, that's a critical part of that narrative is how, it's the what's in it for me, right? Like, how will
Exactly.
this impact me? What does it mean for my job? Is my livelihood intact? Great. Okay, then now I can actually process and move forward in a new way. But customers, absolutely, customers, partners, suppliers, if
Yep.
there's a trickle down effect that you have to be thinking about. And I love that, from a brand strategy perspective, that's a big part of the conversation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, good. Well, let me ask you a couple more questions here because I love we're talking brand change management,
Yeah.
leveraging people's emotions and anchors to certain concepts and things like that. But let's talk a little bit about what's your brand. So when you started your company, and I know you obviously have your podcast and things like that, but what is your brand and how do you develop it as you are growing?
This is such a good question, and it's one that I have struggled with for quite some time. So even when I was working in the corporate world, the question was like, what's your brand? How do you want people to know you? When you're not around, how do you want them to think about you? And so when I started Apogee, I was trying to come up with like, what is my brand? How do I want people to feel? What do I want them to think?
Yeah.
And so where it's landed, I mean, at the end of the day, I don't have a great like 5 second, this is my brand. So maybe you can help me with that offline.
Sure.
But
Anytime.
it's really about how do we help people move through change in a way that recognizes the value and importance of their well-being. So I think about organizational performance being connected to individual performance. And if our well-being is affected by work and home and all of those things, we're not going to show up in the best way. So when we apply change management
Yeah.
to the way that we work and act, then we can create, we can at least do what we can from a well-being perspective for employees. So I want people when they work with me to feel like I genuinely care about
Yes.
their well-being and the well-being of their employees and also results, and that you can't take the two go together. So Apogee's brand, I hope that resonates. The caring for the human side of change, I have used that slogan before, but it's a combination of individual well-being. It drives organizational performance, and how you get there is through the strategies of change management and change leadership. That was a really long statement. I will need your help, Sue.
No, I think it's
With my
great.
brand.
I absolutely think it's great because you're right. And this was something that you said to me earlier too, is that, all strategy is executed by people.
Yes.
And, change management, even in the definition, if you were to go Google, what is change management? It's
Yeah.
all about people and leveraging people. And
Hmm.
yet people are hard. People are
Yes, we're
messy.
complex.
People are tricky. So
We're
everybody
rational. Yeah.
Right. So when you think, so for change management, everyone's like, oh yeah, it's the people side. But then they end up just focusing on the processes and the
Yes.
systems and the implementations. And they're like, well, we'll just send a survey out. That'll handle the people
I'm
side
like,
of it. That's
no, no,
no,
it's relationships.
no, it's
Yeah, it's
relationships. So that's what
the
I love about
connection
what you were
piece.
talking about with your brand is yeah, it's the people. Focus on the people and then the profit and the results will come. So
Everything will follow. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. So, yeah.
Good. It's the same with branding. So, but
Yes, yes, I believe it.
yeah, so this has been awesome. I really appreciate our conversation here and tying the two together. But I want to ask you one more question that I ask all my guests, which is I love honoring small and mid-sized businesses that are just killing it with their brand. They have a great experience, they have great messaging, and I would love to ask you to nominate a small business, if you wouldn't mind, that you think just does a great job.
Okay, this, may be unfair, but I'm going to nominate my husband's law firm. And
Yeah.
the reason why is when I
Yeah.
left my corporate job, I watched what he and now his partner did to create the environment that they have. And so being very focused on people and how they feel and their well-being. His law firm, he's had amazing tenure with the associates that are there today. The partnership team is very strong, and they're so well recognized in the space that they are in because of how they treat their clients and the conversations and the relationships that they've built. And I have just admired how they've been consistently, and they've cared about the well-being. Like, they're not asking their employees to work crazy hours, and they very much respect that people have a life outside of their work. And I've used that as a template in many ways for me to think about what kind of environment I want to create with the people that I work with and through. So he was, maybe an expander for me in that regard. So, I've used that. I've kind of watched him do what he's done, and I've been inspired by it. So I've tried to do it the same.
I like that. And what's the name of the firm?
DaVita Crow Legal. DaVita Crow Legal. Yeah. Based
Nice.
in Denver. They do a lot of M&A and new company formation. And so if you need help, no, I'm kidding.
Woohoo!
And DaVita
Woohoo!
Crow. Yeah.
Let's give them a plug. Absolutely.
Thank
So,
you.
yeah. Well, excellent. Well, Jessica, thank you so much for spending time with me today and sharing your insights on change management and branding and the people and emotional side of transition. So I appreciate that. But if anyone wants to talk to you
Yeah.
about maybe consultation with how you can help them
Sure,
with a
sure.
change management initiative or just to listen to your podcast or anything, where can they
Yeah.
find you?
All of those links are on LinkedIn. I've got my profile, Jessica R. Crow, and then www.apogee.biz. So I've got biz at the end. I've got links to the podcast there. You can get in touch through info@apogee, and Apogee is spelled Apogy. You can kind of see it if you're watching the video. But yeah, there's lots of ways to get in touch. LinkedIn, I'm only on LinkedIn, so no other socials, but www.apogee.biz and info@apogee.biz to email me.
Perfect. Perfect. Everyone, please, please reach out to Jessica if you've got a big change initiative coming up. Or, like I said, her podcast is great and covers all kinds of different change management topics. So, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it, Jessica.
Yes, Sue, thank you so much. And just to plug too, you're going to be coming on my show in a
Yeah.
couple of months because I want to do the same because there are so many synergies between what you do from a brand strategy perspective and change management. And I'm sure there's some overlap with listeners and potentially some new ones that'll check you out as a result. So thank you for everything that you're doing. And I look forward to having you on my show.
Thank you. I'm really looking forward to it. So, excellent. And thank all of you for joining us for this episode of the Turbo Branding Show. I hope you've been inspired to ignite your growth by leveraging your brand. And if you enjoyed it, I would love it if you could help me build a strong brand following for the show. So please share this episode and be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a review. Thank you, and stay tuned for our next episode.